The National Weather Service, part of the agency. But it's my pleasure today to be up here in beautiful Friday Harbor, which, by the way, I haven't been in about 41 years. Born and raised in Seattle. I'm one of those unicorns, becoming increasingly rare. But it's been a while since I've been up here. It's gorgeous. I need to come back. I'm reminded. So really great to be here, and I'd like to introduce my fishery colleagues. Grace Ferrara, who you'll hear from. Tonight, she's with the NOAA Fisheries Protected Resources Division. Lynn Berry, hey everybody, who's the branch chief, and Hannah Miller, who's here to help as well. So thank you for coming. I think these public scoping and listening sessions are really one of the most important things that we can do as civil servants. It's one of the things that I get satisfaction from. I'm entering into community and learning things from you. So thank you again. Tonight, the purpose of this scoping meeting is to listen. It's to gather your input. It's not a Q&A session. It is to really hear from you in a fairly defined kind of way, frankly, because there's a lot of folks here that I'm sure have some input to share. So we'll talk a little bit about that process. But I just want to set the expectation. We are here to gather your input. If there is time at the end, we'll close the meeting and you can talk with your fishery experts depending on what kind of time we have available after the listening session of this meeting is concluded. And what we are really gathering input on today, we want to hear from you about whatever's on your mind, but especially information and comments concerning the advisability of and need for changes to the existing regulations, alternative management options for regulating vessel interactions with killer whales, scientific and commercial information regarding the effect of vessels on killer whales and their habitat, potential economic impacts of management options, and any additional relevant information you think that NOAA Fisheries should consider as part of its rulemaking process. So feel free to share with us whatever's on your mind within the time allocation, but just know these are the things in particular that we're looking to hear from you. So in terms of what to expect tonight, Grace will be providing a brief overview presentation to set the stage. And then I will be working off of comment cards. So if you want to provide some oral input, please fill out a comment card because I will be working off of that. All of the verbal input will be recorded tonight. That's what you see up there with the tape recorder. But this is not the only way to collect input. We're collecting input from a number of different channels, including written comment sheets over there. Hannah has one up. So feel free, if you prefer to provide input that way, to do so. And then also online. I believe that's in the Federal Register notice and also maybe on a handout? Okay. So these are the various ways you're collecting input, and all comments, no matter how you deliver them, are going to be considered equally and really inform this rulemaking process that we are in. Am I forgetting anything about the process pieces here? No? Okay. Restrooms. These are important, yes. Restrooms are right there. So feel free to get up and use them if you need to. Meeting ground rules, I think it's pretty simple. There's a lot of folks here, so we're going to have the ground rule that is, if I had one word, it would be respect. We're going to respect everyone's time, and we're going to make sure that they have time to provide the input that they want to provide, and we'll move on to the next person. So again, this is not a debate or deliberation sort of setting. So I do ask that you respect each other. And I don't anticipate any problems with that, but that's part of what I'm here to do, is to help moderate and get the group through tonight. Anything, am I missing anything, Lynn, Grace? No? Okay. Well, with that, thank you again. I'll turn it over to Grace here to provide a little bit of background information. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you, Timmy. Can everyone hear me? No? Okay, great. So again, my name is Grace. I'm with NOAA Fisheries Protected Resources Division. I'd like to echo Timmy's sentiments, thank you all for being here tonight. It is, your input is so important to us, and we really appreciate you spending the evening with us to share your thoughts. This presentation is going to be very brief. I just want to make sure that I give everyone some basic information to help inform your comments, and then I want to be able to reserve the majority of the time tonight for you all to share your thoughts. So we do have a public comment period open right now for scoping on ways to reduce vessel impacts on killer whales. The deadline for comment submission is December 23rd. As Timmy said, we do have a handout with some of the other ways that you can submit your comments. And this information is also in the Federal Register notice that we published announcing this meeting last month. So, some very basic information on vessel impacts on killer whales. These impacts are very well studied. We have a lot of research out of our Northwest Fisheries Science Center, as well as academic institutions in the US and in Canada, and several NGOs that are dedicated to killer whale research. So killer whales use echolocation to find their food, to communicate with each other, and to navigate. And vessel noise can mask some of those echolocation calls. In response, we've seen killer whales amplify their calls, which requires a bit more energy in the presence of vessels. And we also see them increase something called surface active behaviors in the presence of both motorized and non-motorized vessels. And those are things like spy hopping and breaching and things like that. And we also know that vessel strike is a risk with killer whales as with any other whale. In the Salish Sea, there are 3 sets of regulations. There are Canadian regulations, Washington State regulations, and then the US federal regs. And Canada and Washington updated their regulations in 2019, although Canada's measures were interim measures that were the result of an emergency rulemaking, and those measures expired in October. So currently their regulations match the US federal regulations, but we don't know if they will go through a more permanent rulemaking process, and if so, what measures they will carry over into that process. So for tonight, we're going to look at those interim measures that they implemented in 2019 to kind of set the stage and get an idea for what might be included in any changes that they might make to their regs. We are in close contact with Canada, with our Canadian counterparts, and so they have let us know that they will keep us informed of the process along the way. So this table includes all of the measures in those 3 jurisdictions. I don't mean to go into too much detail here, but I want to point out some key differences. Washington State's regulations apply only to southern residents. In Canada and the US, those regulations apply to all killer whales. In their 2019 measures, Canada did include an exception for members of the Pacific Whale Watch Association to approach transient whales a little bit closer than southern residents. The main differences here between these jurisdictions are that distance limit, that first row. In the US, our federal regulations that we implemented in 2011 included a prohibition on approaching whales closer than 200 yards and parking in the path of the whales within 400 yards. In 2019, Washington updated their distance regs to push that limit out to 300 yards on the sides of the whales and 400 yards in front of and behind the whales. And then Canada's measures updated their distance limit to 400 meters in all directions. Washington State and Canada also implemented speed limits, although Canada's is voluntary. And Canada implemented 3 small sanctuary zones that were closed to all vessel traffic in 2019. Here in the US, we have our voluntary no-go zone on the west side of Salmon Island. And so we're looking for ways to potentially find some harmony between these 3 jurisdictions, because it can get a little bit confusing, I think. So this is the kind of graphic representation of those distance limits. You can kind of see that there's a lot going on. On the right is the federal regulations. You can see that 200-yard buffer around the whales with the 400-yard buffer in front of them. And then on the left, Washington State has that bow tie shape with the 400-yard limit in front of and behind, and the 300 on both sides. And Canada is that 400 on all sides. This is a map of many of the Canadian measures that were put in place. This includes some fisheries measures and other voluntary measures, but I wanted to point out the red areas of those the three closed areas that do not allow vessel traffic in Swiftsure Bank and then off Pender and Saturna Islands. So in addition to the distance limits that we implemented in 2011, NOAA considered many other alternatives as part of our rulemaking process in 2010, and those are all included and described in our final environmental assessment, which is on our website. So other alternatives that we analyzed in detail were a 100-yard approach limit, a speed limit within 400 yards of the whales, and 2 different designs for a no-go zone on the west side of Salmon Island. Other alternatives that we identified but didn't analyze in detail, we ruled them out earlier in the process for various reasons, include all of these measures listed. Things like moratorium on whale watching, rerouting ships, time of day or day of week restrictions, noise level standards, regulations along the coast, codifying all of the whale eyes guidelines, and things like that. In 2017, we did conduct a formal evaluation of the regulations that we put in place in 2011. This evaluation looked at our education and outreach efforts, enforcement, compliance with the regulations, the biological effectiveness of the regulations, and the economic impacts. We used data from the Sound Watch Border Education Program and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, looking at conditions 5 years before the regulations were put in place and 5 years after. Before the regulations were put in place, we used, for example, with compliance, we used the Be Whale Wise guidelines as the proxy for regulations. And I won't go into too much detail about all of these measures, but I did want to pull out some of the highlights for you. So Sound Watch, when they approach boats on the water, they conduct a survey to see if the people on the boat are aware of the guidelines and the regulations. We see that before the regulations were put in place, the proportion of vessel operators that were unaware of the Be Whale Wise guidelines was quite high. Now we see that awareness fluctuates just below 50% of all vessels targeted by Sound Watch. We've seen that trend continue past 2015. So awareness is slightly lower than we expected or than we would like, but it has improved over time. With compliance, we've seen since 2011 kind of a decreasing trend in the number of incidents of noncompliance that Sound Watch has reported on the water. We did see a slight increase in 2011. That could be due to a variety of factors such as increased monitoring by Sound Watch on the water, things like that. But we are seeing an improvement over time. Compliance is still a little bit lower than we would like to see, but it's an area for improvement. Some other interesting findings from that evaluation are that compliance is significantly higher in the presence of enforcement vessels. You can see from this graph, those red bars represent the number of observed incidents by Sound Watch when WDFW enforcement officers are not present. We have very limited data on the received noise levels before the regulations were put in place, but with the data that we do have, we found that those levels, the noise levels that the whales are experiencing did not decrease as we expected. And then we contracted an economic analysis out to a private economic firm, and they found no discernible negative economic impacts to the whale watch industry. So some of our big picture conclusions are that conditions are better for the whales post-regulations. We see that in the fact that we have more compliance with enforcement present, and that more recreational boaters are aware of the regulations than they were of the voluntary guidelines. However, we still have room for improvement, which is what has brought us here today. So these are the questions that Timmy read off from the Federal Register notice to help kind of guide your comments. This is the information that we're looking for. kind of first and foremost is, should we change the federal regulations, given the new conditions on the water and the changes in other jurisdictions that we saw this year? And if so, what management alternatives do you think we should consider? Is there any relevant scientific or commercial information that you would like to share with us? And can you think of any potential economic impacts on management alternatives? And then finally, kind of, is there just any additional information that you would like us to consider? So that is all I have. And I will hand it back to Tinny for the comments.
Thank you, Grace. I'm going to hand it, the comment cards are this file?
Upside down.
Okay. All right, so we have a timer, Grace? Are you going to project?
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to invite Carrie Brooks up. And next after her will be Janet Thomas.
Just 1 second, please, and if you could state your name at the beginning of your comment and speak clearly, that'll help with our recording. Just need 1 more second.
Then I have a question.
Is it a process question, sir?
Yeah,
Okay.
we had received an email saying it's 3 minutes per person. Is it 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
I think we probably have enough time where we can do 3 minutes, if that's what people are prepared for.
They did say 3 minutes. There we go.
All right.
Thank you.
I was hoping to be last. This isn't fair. My name is Carrie Brooks. I'm a former Friday Harbor Town Council person. I was on the Town Council for 10 years. I was elected for 3 4-year terms. And I have been a banker at Islanders Bank for 30 years. I just retired last year. And I've been a loan officer. I have done business loans with different types of industries that are related to the tourism here that is mostly caused by whale watch information. I wanted to show you that in 2018, the Anacortes to Friday Harbor ferry ridership was 904,000 people, almost 905,000 people. Let's say that half of those were tourists, 500,000 people. And they're coming to Friday Harbor, they're staying in hotels, motels, they are eating in the restaurants, they are going on all different kinds of excursions and walks and all different kinds of places, affecting so many of our people here. And they're paying money for all of this. The whale watch companies, I know of one whale watch company that I have information on, in the year 2018, had $65,000 in sales tax that they paid. Of that, $14,000 went to the town of Friday Harbor. The town of Friday Harbor has about 1,500 people, 1,600 people. They cannot service what happens in Friday Harbor. When we have 1 million people coming in to the island, this was just ferry ridership. We have other ways people get here to the island. We have 1 million people that visit here, and the town cannot service with restrooms and streets and repairs and sidewalks and all of that kind of thing without the sales tax. $14,000 from this one business alone went to the town of Friday Harbor. If we multiply that times 20 or 30, or if you include the restaurants and the hotels and so on and the sales tax there, you know why the town of Friday Harbor has been blessed. And in fact, we're called the golden goose for the state of Washington. The money that's used there goes to the state. So we're not only affecting, if we have a total moratorium, we're not only going to destroy the economy of Friday Harbor, but of San Juan Island and of San Juan County and of the state of Washington. We're going to have a big lack in sales tax money. And so I really want people to understand, we're only 15,000 people maybe in our county, but we're a very important county. And we're also people that live here. We're not greedy people. We're some of the most giving people that any group has ever seen. So I just want people to know that.
Thank you very much.
Janet Thomas.
Janet Thomas, thank you.
Am I at 3 minutes?
I'm here in 3 capacities. One is as a 28-year resident in San Juan County. Another one was as county park superintendent. And in the recent years, I'm the executive director of the Orca Relief Citizens Alliance. My understanding in reference to the statistics that we were just quoted is that 97% of the people that come to San Juan County come for peace and quiet. The report that came out of the Visitors Bureau was 3% of the people that come here to go out whale watching. We are actually home to an extraordinary number of whale watching businesses. The minority of them are based here in San Juan County. It was very interesting to me when the whale watch industry agreed to respect whale protection zones around islands in Canada. And why did they do that? Because they could come here to the home territory of the southern residents. As a 28-year resident, when I first moved here, I drove one morning around 6:30 along the west side, and I saw orcas for the first time. And I lived in Bainbridge for 20 years before, and I was completely stunned by it. And I also saw 2 pods greet each other. And those were the days when there was no harassment on any level of the orca whales. They would stay in those kelp beds on the west side for hours with their families, foraging, resting, being there in their home waters. They no longer have access to their home waters. It's been their home for more than 10,000 years. And the argument you will hear all the time is, oh, the whales don't go, the orcas don't go there anymore, southern residents. They can't. Their echolocation is like every sense that we have in our bodies. It's not just their hearing, it's their orientation to gravity, it's their sight, it's their ability to speak, it's their ability to care for their family. It is a critical group of senses that they require for existence. The noise underwater from the cavitation impacts of propellers and boats is deafening to them. We don't get it because we're not under the water with them. And we judge and value everything according to our own senses. And we right now on this planet, in this time, we're an invasive species. It's not all about the friggin' money. It's about life on Earth. And the southern residents are the highest, they're at the top of the chain in the waters. With their sophistication, their care for families, their matrilineal, they are a powerful species, as powerful underwater as we are on land. And if we can't save them, we cannot save ourselves.
Buffum, and
Got him.
Emily Damon, you'll be after Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you, Timmy, Lynn, and Claire. My name is Stephanie Buffum. I'm a recreational kayaker. I've been a sailor. I'm a mother, and I've been the executive director of Friends of the San Juans since 2001. The purpose of this proceeding is to consider if additional regulations are needed to address vessel-related impacts to southern resident killer whale. And I'd like to say yes to that. And I'd like to walk you through 4 of the 5 points that are in the Friends of the San Juans comment letter. Southern resident killer whales encounter a range of vessel types in Washington state waters, including commercial whale watching and recreational boats, fishing, commercial ships, ferries, military vessels. Vessel disturbance and noise cause multiple threats to southern resident killer whales, including the risk of vessel strike, masking echolocation and communication signals, forcing them to spend more time traveling and performing surface activity behaviors and less time foraging and other behavioral changes. Vessel interference with the southern residents' ability to find and capture prey is even more damaging when prey is so scarce. And that's why we are asking you in separate venues to allocate more fish for orca. But that's not today's work. Southern resident killer whales cannot afford to waste precious energy. They can't afford more time foraging. They need to get more food and less toxins out of their fat. Their reserves are releasing toxic amounts to their young. So now for the first question before us. Yes, we advise you all to consider making changes to the existing regulations. Changes that will include additional protection recovery regulations. While existing vessel regulations reduce vessel impacts, they are routinely violated. We've seen that in statistics. Regulations are needed that clearly communicate critical status for endangered population. Number two, and I'm going to run out of time here, alternatives to consider for vessel regulations with respect to tribal treaty rights include the no-go zone or a network of no-go zones and creek foraging habitat. If no-go zones are identified with the qualification when southern residents are present, let's define present to mean southern residents have entered the Strait of Juan de Fuca at Louis J. or north to the Campbell River. Implementation of the Southern Resident Task Force Recommendation 28, suspend viewing and southern resident orcas, which was attempted to be implemented with the 650-yard distance requirement, should also be considered. Thank you for limiting an entry wildlife viewing regulations for southern residents.
Thank you, Stephanie. And then Lovell Pratt. Emily first. Emily Gaines.
I'm Emily Diamond. I've lived here 40 years. I was counselor at Friday Harbor School, which was very special, and then some of you may know me because I wrote Emily's Guides to the Islands, which I tried to focus on the environment. A recent UN report states that 1 million plants and animal species are currently threatened with extinction, and 500 species of animals have actually gone extinct in the last century, primarily due to degradation and destruction of their environment. Our orcas are in danger for the very same reasons, but we have knowledge to keep that from happening. We can take measures to increase the number of salmon. We can figure out ways to protect orcas from the noise of boat motors and which interfere with their echolocation. And we can reduce pollution. We can do this, but will we? That depends on our values. The values of our government and the values of each of us. I just hope that preserving our value, that preserving the orcas and our environment is a top priority for the decision-making for taking care of our orcas.
Lovell Pratt. I apologize if I'm not doing your name justice. Followed Lynn Danner. So Lovell and then Lynn.
Thank you. So I'm Lovell Pratt. I'm with Friends of the San Juans, and I'm just going to follow up on a few more points on the Friends of the San Juans comment letter. The Code of Federal Regulations on the Critical Habitat for Southern Resident Killer Whales includes 3 primary constituent elements essential for the conservation of the southern residents. Best available science informs us that a 4th primary constituent element must be added, and that would be underwater acoustical conditions to support communication, prey location and successful capture, socialization, and courtship and resulting procreation. And then in answer to the question number 5, I also want to say thank you for considering transboundary coordination as a component of the rulemaking. And in answer to number 5, we asked NIMS to take an active role in the permit review processes for all new and expanding refinery and terminal projects that would increase vessel traffic, to ensure that potential impacts to Southern residents are being thoroughly evaluated and addressed. And in this area, transboundary coordination is needed to evaluate the cumulative impacts to Southern resident killer whales from increases in vessel traffic. So attached to our comment letter is our Salish Sea vessel traffic projections infographic, which shows 25 proposed new, expanding, or recently completed projects, which cumulatively would add another 4,232 annual vessel transits to and from ports in British Columbia and Washington. And that's a 35% increase over 2018 vessel traffic levels. And this is in large ocean-going commercial vessel traffic. Canada's ECHO program, Enhancing Cetacean Habitat and Observation program, and potentially a similar program as yet to be adopted here in Washington State, is effective at better understanding and managing the vessel traffic impacts from existing large commercial shipping activities. However, these programs do not adequately address the additional and cumulative vessel traffic impacts to Southern residents from new and expanding projects that increase vessel traffic. Thank you very much for considering these comments and for coming here to Friday Harbor to listen to all the testimony today. Thank you.
Lynn Danaher, thank you. And then April Ryan, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys coming here. My name is Lynn Danaher. I'm a refugee from Alaska. I came here in 1994 because I lost my fishery due to the Exxon Valdez oil spill. So I came here and I started a whale watch company called San Juan Excursions, which is still very viable and doing really well, and I'm pleased to see Pete here. I also wanted to let you know that because I was a successful salmon fisherman in Alaska, I know that fisheries can be managed properly. And I'm sure you can attest to that. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game has done 2 programs. One, they manage the fishery to preserve the runs, which is what we need to be focused here. The orca need to eat. That's the bottom line. So these runs need to be enhanced any way possible. The second thing is they need to make sure that there is some kind of a program to limit vessels around the whales, commercial vessels. We implemented a very successful limited entry program. I think that that is an obvious choice in terms of what to do relative to the whale watching industry. And honestly, I don't think that punishing the small business people of the whale watching industry with more regulations and not implementing severe regulations on the shipping industry is very short-sighted. And I think it's discriminatory. And I believe that those that are concerned about vessel traffic, think about what it was like to live through the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Nobody wants to go through that. There should not be a tanker coming in here without a double hull and without tug escorts. So that's what you really need to be contemplating on. Salmon enhancement, vessel protection in terms of the types of vessels that enter this area, and also make sure that you implement some kind of limited entry that will slow down new people coming into the industry. Alaska's done it, Maui's done it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are ways to do this. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, it's really important, because in the whale watching industry, I realized that all these private boaters were kind of brain dead, and you could see that. Even these current statistics, though not completely current, show that the people weren't aware of the regulations. It's the whale watching industry that sets the standard. If you're out there in a private boat, I can't tell you how many times I used to have to go up to someone and remind them of the distance that they needed to stay away from the whales. And that's the whale watching industry sets the standard. And they're the best enforcement we have out there. And that's the thing that you have to understand. And I'm all about the whales too. But remember, the transits are coming in and cleaning up the seals now because there's no salmon. So it's salmon enhancement and vessel control. Limited members.
April Ryan, and then Nathan Donnelly, please.
I'm April Ryan. I, like Lynn, also work in the whale watch industry. I got here about 4 years ago in 2016, and used to watch whales go by the west side. Sitting there on a piece of property and thinking, oh, this is a great life. That has not happened this year. It didn't happen too much last year. Regulations, I really don't think any more enhancements is really going to help that. I think what we have to really think about, we've looked at vessel noise, and your research shows that there's not the significant drop in sound that you thought there would be with more regulation. And that's because of the huge vessels, the ocean-going vessels that come and go, and it's going to continue to increase. If we don't do anything about that, the seas aren't going to be quieted. In addition, if we're talking about southern residents on the west side, we've got to look at salmon. How do we get more salmon? We've got to look at the Fraser River. That means we need to work with our Canadian counterparts and do something about those floodgates on the Fraser River. 90% of those floodgates are inoperable, which means they're closed. That stops the Chinook from completing their migration, stops them from completing or fulfilling all of the spawning, and eventually it stops any fish fry from continuing their journey into adulthood. If we don't have salmon, we don't have killer whales. We don't have southern residents. We're going to do great with the T's. They're awesome. That's another thing we need to look at. That is a parallel population that is over 500 individuals now. Southern residents are 73 and declining. If we don't do something, it's not going to be just Princess Angeline. It's not going to be just Scarlet. It's going to be more. We lost Scooter and Nissa too this year. What are you going to say when Mega dies and Onyx? And we didn't do anything. There's one thing we can do. We can work with the Canadians. Where are the southern residents right now? J-Pod is down by Tacoma. You want to talk about noise? How much noisier and polluted does it get? Seattle to Tacoma, military vessels, ferry traffic, and all of those shipping containers coming in, container ships. Come on, how noisy does it get? Why are they there? The winter chum run. They're looking for food. We gotta get them food.
And then Alan Lewis. Alan?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out to Friday Harbor. I'm a resident of Lopez Island. If you would like to come out there and do this here, we would welcome you hugely. My name is Nathan Donnelly. I'm one of the sponsors of the Orca Protection Initiative that we all should have been voting on recently. Unfortunately, that got stopped. I'm also a former salmon fisheries biologist and a wildlife biologist, and in 2015 and 2016, I had the great pleasure of being the county parks manager on the west side of this island. So I have a lot of time standing and watching whale-watching boats chase whales around. The Orca Protection Initiative that we wrote this spring and early summer was based on what the Orca Task Force put together for 2 years here in Washington State. It was a 650-yard distance regulation that followed the whales wherever they went. It did show that sound of the type that's produced by smaller vessels as opposed to tankers or ferries is a lot more detrimental to their ability to hunt and communicate and travel and rest. We're not talking about, part of the reason they may be down in Tacoma is because large vessel traffic is a different kind of sound than the tight and whiny sound that comes from a smaller, although still 800 horsepower engine. Personally, as a former national park ranger, I find it impossible to believe that we're still debating whether or not it's appropriate to chase around an animal and deciding whether or not it's detrimental to its health. If we were on ATVs in Yellowstone National Park chasing around buffalo, there would be zero question as to whether or not that's an appropriate thing to do. But here we are. We are debating an activity that a 5-year-old could look at and tell you whether or not it's going to negatively impact these whales. You can bend the science all you want. You can compile dozens and dozens of studies. There's overwhelming amount of studies showing that this type of sound negatively impacts their ability to hunt. I'm a hunter myself. If I go out into a field to bow hunt a deer and a dozen dirt bikes come through there, I'm not going to get a deer. We're not just talking about affecting the whales, we're talking about what they hunt. Chinook salmon. Not chum, not rockfish, not all these other things. They need Chinook salmon. As a fisheries biologist, bringing more Chinook salmon here is going to be a 20-year process minimum. Okay? We can do distance regulations like that. That's the one thing we can do in our own backyard right now, is change distance regulations right now instead of playing Russian roulette with the last 73 whales we have here. Could have been done a few weeks ago. It's the one thing we as San Juan County residents can do like that. Thank you very, very much.
Alan? Sorry,
Niles.
I'm sorry.
Niles.
Niles, thank you. And then Tim McGuire. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alan Niles. I'm a whale watch captain. So I'm going to follow that kind of specifically because it kind of gets me going. So it's my responsibility to run these whale watching trips and to bring an experience of wildlife to people coming to visit the San Juan Islands. And I take it really seriously, a real passion for the area and for these animals. One of the things I do every trip before we get on scene is we kind of introduce what people are about to see, and especially with southern residents. One of the things I do is I literally stop the boat prior to people getting on scene before they get into like whale freak-out mode, and let them know that what they're about to see is incredibly precious and very rare, and something that we need to be very respectful for and honor. So I take that time to make that introduction to them and let them know why we're going to take the time that we are to approach the whales from over half a mile away, 7 knots, come in nice and slow, sit back 300 yards, and appreciate their behaviors from a distance and respectfully and quietly. It blows people away, the information that we give them, and for the most part, they have no idea what the challenges of these killer whales are. If we implemented that 650-yard regulation, we wouldn't be watching those killer whales. The consequence is all these recreational boaters would be running over killer whales left and right. The first 2 encounters I had with killer whales this year, I was coming back from viewing mountain killer whales. The southern residents started coming down the west side. I have to come back to my harbor, I have to cross where they are. So as I come in, I'm slowed down, I'm watching through binoculars. I see dorsal fins, I see 4 36-foot yachts running right over the top of them at 20 knots. Probably running 600 horsepower engines. Not a clue that there were whales in the area. I hope they didn't have a clue, because if they did, then they're really bad. Another time, the next time, right out in front of line film, killer whales are going by, sitting there, engines off, watching from about, probably half a mile away at that point. And these power yacht comes running through close inshore. We're waving our flag, our windows open, we've got 15 people out in the boat, all yelling at these people, trying to get their attention. Nothing. They run right over to the killer whales. It wasn't until the 4 whales breached, and next to the boat, they're like, yeah. Anyway, you get the idea. When the whale watch boats are around, being respectful, honoring the distances, in a nice row, we alert the private boaters, and we actually quiet the waters in and around the whales, wherever the whales are, not just the west side of San Juan.
Tim? And then Mark Anderson.
Well, once again, thank you guys for having us and having us out here. Tim McGuire, I've worked for the Washington State Ferries for 40 years, and in those 40 years I've grown an affinity for the plight of the orca whale. I've commented on what I've seen as the most damaging aspect of the orca's life, and now finally being specifically addressed by your committee, and that is the harassment for whales by the whale watching industry. When you travel around the Sound from Port Angeles, Kingston, Edmonds, Everett, and of course Bellingham, Friday Harbor, Vancouver, Sydney, Vancouver, BC, advertisements for whale watching. To quote Dr. David Suzuki, a noted scientist, environmental activist, "We are loving nature to death." And I have witnessed vessels herding orcas around the San Juan Islands in extremely close proximity, severely limiting their ability to feed on the Chinook salmon. The Chinook being very sensitive to noise levels and will flee to deep water to avoid vessel noise. I have been putting forth the following suggestions to every appeal for public comment on the orca. An outright ban on whale watching industry, or at least a partial ban, only allowing pursuit every other day or a few days a week to allow it feed in peace. Increasing the no-go zones for vessel traffic and speed reductions for vessel traffic through known orca feeding zones. This is a big one, an easy one. Require the posting on all vessels a placard adjacent to the steering stations with the current limits of approach to whales, which I believe to be inadequate. Much the same as a required posting for the carbon monoxide warnings on the vessels. Increased patrol by the state Washington Fish and Wildlife for encroachment laws on vessels. We are truly loving nature to death, and unfortunately, without intervention by enacting laws to prohibit the exploitation of whales, in a few years, the industry will be out of business, and there will be no more whales to watch. Their majesty will just be a memory. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Mark Anderson and then Sophia Ressler. And if you haven't filled out a comment card and want to provide some input, please raise a hand over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Most of you know we've been around since '96. I've lived here for 46 years. That's hard to believe. I've never seen someone. Perhaps a lack of taste. We started orca relief back in '96 because we were the first ones. I was the first person to predict the downfall of these whales. And we knew it because I knew it because they were starving. We saw serious proof that they were starving. We then hired the University of Washington to do the first science study. They did a great study. It was groundbreaking. They found something which is still true today. I'm going to give you the one-sentence answer when anyone tells you there's no science. Here's how the whales die. When the Chinook count is low, comma, the presence of motorized commercial craft increase their need for food and decrease their ability to get it, and they starve. That's it. That's simple. That's how they're dying. And they've been dying like that since 1996. If we look at science and ask the experts, we brought Chris Clark, who's the world expert on bioacoustics, here one night, and he showed a simulation he did about 2 years ago. It's the best study ever done of the exact contours of our Sailor Sea, how the sound moves in that sea, what the fish do, and what the whales do. And on King 5, he said, this is acoustic hell for these whales. We're not confused about this. We argue over the money part of it. But nobody in this room, honestly, if we're being honest with each other, is confused about what's happening here. We're trading money for whales. And we have to stop doing that now. We have to take a breather. This population has gone over the edge already. If you ask somebody who studies population dynamics, it's not a head count, it's not 73, it's how many breeding animals of two different genders are available in each pod, and the answer is none, often enough, or one. We are already over the cliff. So it's not time to debate or talk, it's time to back off. And at the very best, if we backed off completely, the chances of them actually surviving our treatment of them until now, from back then, not good. We'll probably lose it. An honest answer is we'll probably lose it. But why not try? Why wouldn't we try? So I think we should try. So my recommendation to you is find a way to protect the southern resident whales, period, for 3 to 5 years, as the task force said, after 2 years of study, as the government said. Find a way to protect that particular endangered species, and let whale watch operators keep doing it with the other whales. And as Greta Thunberg would say, we have no choice, follow the science.
Sophia Wessler, and then Ivan Wright.
Thank you. My name is Sophia Wessler. I'm an attorney with the Center for Biological Diversity, and I have the great pleasure to be here tonight on behalf of our 1.4 million members, 36,000 of whom live in Washington State. I feel even more fortunate though because I grew up with the Salish Sea as my backyard. I have spent what amounts to years up in these islands, and I have had countless encounters with our magnificent southern resident killer whales. And the bottom line is that these whales are facing imminent extinction. And it's based on prey abundance, it's based on contaminants, and it's based on vessel noise and disturbance. But it is, there have been studies that have come out recently that say it's vital to look at all of these threats cumulatively. So we agree that prey abundance is a big issue. However, focusing on just prey right now isn't going to save the whales. So I'm going to keep my comments a little shorter just because I think that everybody has kind of touched on, the impacts of vessels, what needs to be done in order to, save these whales. But I think that it's important to note that these whales can't afford to expend extra time and extra energy looking for their prey right now, and that is what vessel noise and disturbance is causing them to have to do. The center has, as many of you are well aware, petitioned for a no-go zone in the primary feeding habitat, and we believe that existing vessel regulations are helpful, but they're simply not going to go, they don't go far enough. So this no-go zone in their prime feeding area is going to be easier to enforce and could have immediate impacts to help save the orcas by cutting down on vessel noise, disturbance, and providing an immediate conservation benefit. We're looking forward to supporting and participating in the whale watching permitting effort, which has the potential to provide the blueprint for a sustainable tourism industry. But until we figure out the details of that, these orcas need sanctuary from the noisy, congested, contaminated, and depleted environment that we have created for them. So they're going extinct, and we should be doing everything we can to give them a fighting chance. We look forward to providing some more detailed comments in writing. I would also just like to repeat our request for a hearing in Seattle. I know that that was denied, but I think that this is a regional issue, and although I think that it's obviously very important up here, I also think that there's a lot more people that have been denied access and the ability to comment on this because of this location. Thank you.
And Tim Reagan.
All right, I'm not as eloquent as Mark Anderson over there, definitely not as charismatic, but I'll do my best here. My name is Ivan Wright. I'm a 16-year resident, raising a family here on San Juan Island, and I own Western Prince Whale Watching. Been doing that the entire time I've been here. I am deeply disappointed in NOAA. These whales were listed in 2005. It is now 2019, and we're still talking about the vessels. We've done a lot of regulations, we've had a lot of these meetings, and these whales are still dying. There were 88 animals in 2005, there are 73 now, and we're still talking about vessels. And it's not like we haven't done anything about vessels. All the studies you're talking about as far as presence and as far as surface active behavior, Mark Anderson, the data he was using for that sound study is all pre-regulation. The surface action behavior study is 2008, is that correct? I believe? Yes. Somewhere around that. Regulations came in 2011. In 2008, professional whale watchers were at 100 yards. We are now at 300 for southern residents. 300, 3 football fields. For the last decade, the professional whale watchers are reducing speed to 7 knots or less. That we urged NOAA to do in the rulemaking in 2011. And they couldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. Washington State did. That is the biggest difference that it's going to make as far as sound goes and as far as vessels go. And I urge NOAA to follow Washington State's lead. I urge them to institute a 7-knot slow zone around the whales at all times. Should be around all whales, and all orcas especially. And in general, follow the Washington State lead. Little bit of information as far as southern residents. Unfortunately, the last 3 years, J-Pod has only been in the Salish Sea 27% of the year. K-Pod, 9%, and L-Pod, 10%. So we're all focused here, yet most of these whales are spending most of their time in their other part of the range, 1,000 miles of coastline. We are just now, after 15 years, talking about critical habitat on the outer coast. And again, we're sitting here hammering whale watch companies, demonizing whale watch companies, when we're trying to help, we're trying to be part of the solution by bringing the public out and teaching them about their plight. We need to work together.
I will submit more detailed comments, but I'll be trying to get one across, I guess, one concept right now. And other people have already talked about it, and Emily, wherever you're sitting, I really love what you said, because you got it across. We face this kind of situation with lots of marine mammals, and we spend a lot of time doing half measures and really not getting the job done until we get to a crisis, and then often it's too late. We lost the Baiji not too long ago. Over in China, and we knew it was going. We just didn't do anything about it. We're about to lose the vaquita. The vaquita was about 567 of them in the early 1990s. We're lucky now if we have 5 to 10. We're not sure we've got any left right at the moment. We took the Cook Inlet beluga whale and we knew exactly what knocked them down. It was killing by Alaska natives. Went from probably about maybe 900 or so down to 350. We stopped that and, yeah, they're going to return right away and be better. No, they haven't. They have not. They've actually continued to decline, even though we said we stopped it. Hawaiian monk seals, it's taken us 7 decades to even try to start reversing a decline for that species, even though we've been putting a lot of money into that population. Over and over again with marine mammals, we have assumed we knew what we were doing, or we could find that little nugget of a measure that would work. But it turns out it isn't that little nugget, it's every nugget we can find. I really want to work on this dam project because I think we need to look at that. I really want to work hard on issues related to large ships because I think that is a potential problem. But we've got to do everything we can at this point. We cannot afford simply to pick this or that solution. Now, there are economic benefits, and I'm sorry about that, or economic consequences, and I am sorry about that. But at the same time, I lost my job when I was a young person working. I was in Seattle working as a carpenter. Okay, so we had a recession. All the carpenters got laid off. Nobody worked. I went back to school, find another job. It's hard, but at some point we have to ask who we are. Are we really going to sit and let this southern resident population go extinct when there are things we could be doing? We're not going to know for sure whether or not the things we do are going to work, but we ought to be trying everything that we can do if we really expect to turn this population around. So NOAA, find your courage. do the thing that you're supposed to do under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. Set those protections. Don't focus on, will this protection be the answer? It's whatever protections we are, they have to be adequate to make sure that we're not contributing to the decline of the species. And everything we can throw at it, we should be throwing.
Bertel. Awesome. And then David Bain.
Valerie, thanks. Nice to meet you.
I'm Greg Bertel. I live here, and I've been a teacher here, port commissioner, and I own a small cruise boat, Friday Harbor Cruises. A little history. 1919, when Prohibition was enacted, if you're wondering where this is going, I'm old. Indulge me. The Coast Guard had exactly one patrol boat in Puget Sound. It was a 10-knot converted tug called the Arcata. Their best boats were all in Alaska protecting the fur seals, and they were able to get those boats down here. Bring this to the current day. When I'm out on the water, in the distance, if I see that there's whales and whale watch boats out there, I can tell from a mile away whether or not patrols are out there, whether WFTW is available, because if they are, everybody's lined up. Like Alan said, it's calmer. They're lined up. The recreational boats see that, take notice, and they start looking to see what's in the area. If the patrols aren't there, things are a little more chaotic. The recreational boats don't notice it as much. So what I want to urge NOAA to do is, it doesn't matter what you do for rules if you don't have enforcement. You need to have enforcement. Don't get caught like the Coast Guard in 1919 with one boat down here. And you don't have to design these things at government expense and government time. There's lots of good used boats out there. We don't need enforcement boats that are the latest and the greatest and the highest speed. There's used boats that'll cover the area. We need to get hulls in the water to enforce the laws that we get. I'm not going to take a position on one side or the other as to whether or not we need stricter rules. We need to enforce the rules that we decide are important for us. We need to live by those rules. The whale watch people do a great job of that. They really do. The recreational boaters sometimes intentionally don't. That's rare, but sometimes they do. And sometimes they're just clueless. It's easy to get surprised by a blow that comes up suddenly off your bow. If you're not looking for that, if you're paying attention to your depth sounder, to navigation, you don't always see that. But when you see a line of boats, you pay attention. So it's important to get the enforcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. David Bain and Sarah McCullough.
Hi, I'm David Bain. I've been doing scientific studies on the effects of whale watching on killer whales since 1983. Mark summarized part of my research when he gave his speech. What I'd like to see are noise-based guidelines. And I'd like to see a cap on noise exposure from vessels in the neighborhood of 100 to 105 dB, as opposed to the current NOAA regulations, which are designed to cap them at about 120 dB. This is going to require reviewing data on the distribution of noise by vessel type, speed, and orientation. We're going to have to take into consideration natural ambient from wind and rain. We need to consider the ambient noise from ships, and ideally we can unify regulations between Canada, the US, and the state of Washington. We need to be careful not to confuse compliance with benefits to whales. It seems like the main source of noise reaching whales is often commercial shipping or small boats traveling fast that are not engaged in whale watching. So further quieting the whale watch fleet does not further quiet the water around the whales. The Endangered Species Act requires zero impact, and we need to make sure our regulations achieve that. We also need to be aware that even the best intentioned whale watch operators will make mistakes from time to time, so it's fair to ask them to engage in mitigation activities. I'd like to point out that closed areas only work when they're closed to all vessels, but we should be looking at closures where compliance is difficult. So the state rules have an exemption for navigational safety, and where boats have difficulty maintaining distance and speed and operating safely, we may want to close areas altogether. Alternatives we should be considering include no-go zones, distance regulations, speed regulations, noise regulations, with the goal of maximizing the amount of time that noise exposure is below a safe threshold for the whales. We should be looking at imposing mitigation requirements on the commercial fleet. These can be things like engaging their passengers in restoration, encouraging them to comment on policies that affect killer whales, supporting bona-fide scientific research, helping enforcement manage non-commercial vessels, and we can be considering limited entry as far as what it takes to minimize the number of mistakes that non-commercial vessels make. I'd like to add that there are, let me finish up in a few seconds. There are data sets that USGS, NIMS, and the academic community have sponsored. A lot of it's unpublished, but it's available. And finally, I'd like to encourage you to put this in the context of cumulative effects, not just of noise, but of prey availability, toxins, and other factors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And Brian Bidvermont.
Hi.
Hello, my name is Sarah McCullough. I am a whale watch captain. I'm also the lead naturalist for a whale watch company here in Friday Harbor. My background is in wildlife management and conservation biology. I'm a degreed biologist. To comment on what David Bain is saying too, just to follow up on that, every single day on our boats we talk about conservation. We have a conservation fee that gets distributed out to research at the end of every year. So that's already enacted by many whale watch companies, including our own. I've been a part of this community for the last 5.5 years. I find it an awesome, wonderful, ethical, empathetic area to call home. But in all honesty, I find this conversation, this repeated conversation, exhausting and truly inconsequential to the recovery of southern resident killer whales. Since southern resident killer whales were listed in 2005, we have seen voluntary as well as imposed vessel regulations change several times. As one of my colleagues said, when the whales were listed in 2005, there were 88 individuals. Today there are 73. That is a gross failure on the recovery process. Since their listing, we have seen more of the NOAA budget, your recovery budget, dedicated to vessels than to either contamination or prey availability. The two other legs of the three-legged stool of recovery, excuse me. For context, from 2003 to 2012, NOAA's science and research allocated 18% of their $11.9 million budget to vessels, twice that of the budget allocated to prey research, which was 9%. In the same time period for management and conservation, their $3.8 million budget, 20% was dedicated to vessels and just 7% to prey. With this allocation of funds, time, and energy, where have we gotten? We have continued to see this population decline. In the same space of time, the southern resident killer whales have been afforded a recovery strategy. In their core critical habitat, we've seen significant increases in both the humpback whale sightings, as well as marine mammal-eating bigs killer whales, also known as transients. Both populations have been bolstered by abundant prey. We do not see southern resident killer whales use their historic habitat in the same way. This continued discussion of vessel management and misallocation of funds is a disservice to this population, wasting time that they do not have anymore. Right now, in place in Washington, there are regs and guidelines that have been shown to reduce and mitigate effects of whale watch to zero. If you want to make a difference in the future, treat whale watch as the partners in conservation that we want to be. Focus on a greater public education for private recreational boaters by your rigs, the most common vessel type out of compliance on the water. Work on decreasing impact from tanker traffic, and please invest our money as citizens in solving the hard problem of prey availability you have consistently avoided. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And then Eric Eisenhart.
Thank you. My name is Brian Bidvermont. I consider myself a professional educator, whale watch captain, sea kayak guide. been involved in the whale watch industry since 1998. Personal to the first question, I would say I don't believe that any changes should be made to current vessel guidelines. Or if they do, we've provided you a science-based vessel management plan that looks very much like what David Bain just described. It is creating an acoustic cap on the amount of noise that whale watch vessels could, quote, acceptably create on the water. I would argue that in 2019 we accomplished what we would consider near zero acoustic output whale watching. And let me provide a little bit of feedback on that. Based on our data from the summer, which we began to provide to you 3 weeks ago through our app, the average number of whale watch vessels with southern resident killer whales this summer was 2. The average number of whale watch vessels with other species of whales was 3.5. Based on best available science conducted by your staff and other scientists in the region, that puts our decibel level output, if we're operating under our voluntary guidelines at operating 7 knots or less within 300 yards of southern resident killer whales and a half-mile go slow zone, that puts our decibel level at less than 105 decibels. It may put our decibel level at 101 or 102 decibel levels. But these are the types of actions that we have proposed. To answer your second question, management alternatives. A lot of the things that people are asking for in this room that oppose whale watching, we're already doing voluntarily. We'd be happy to continue to do those voluntarily. As a matter of fact, our guidelines have informed county, state, and federal law over the last 20 years. Many times our voluntary guidelines exceeded county, state, and federal laws, and those laws were informed by our voluntary guidelines, which were developed based on best available science. So I would conclude by saying we're not the enemy here. We are the professional educators on the water. You can't work with us if you oppose what we do. But the truth is that best available science shows that we can operate in a sustainable way with very minimal acoustic impacts that don't mask echolocation as we've been accused.
Kelly Malcolm Bartok.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Eric Eisenhart. I first came to Friday Harbor in '97. I was a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed aspiring marine biologist, and I came here and worked on marine reserves for rockfish and lingcod. I got a scholarship and did a master's degree at the UW Labs here. I got paid to do an old school thesis master's. I went on and worked at WDFW for 3 years, where I worked in groundfish. I'm also a biologist. I ran Sound Watch. I took over for Kerry Koski for 3 years after that. It's neat to see some of the data, all the data I collected included in your work, and nice to meet you, great to have fun to chat some other time. And I've also worked as a whale watch captain after that, and I've been laid off as a whale watch captain last year. So I'm now doing other things. So the economic impacts are real to these rules. I'd also like to say that the Pacific Whale Watch Association and the member companies are the most highly regulated whale watch fleet in the world, far and away. And the key is not more regulation. As has been pointed out, I'm also not an acoustician, but I was involved in the first iteration of the hydrophones at Limekiln with David Bain and Rich Osborne, the Sea Sound project. This now become Orca Sound and become other things, and also helped Val Veers install his hydrophones in front of his house back in the day when I was a volunteer diver on things. So I've been involved in acoustics and know a little bit about it. My understanding is the sound levels received by killer whales when vessels are going less than 7 knots at a half mile is equivalent to the sound of rainfall on the water, as far as levels of sound received by the animals. they've been surviving fishing in these waters with rainfall for quite a while. I think they agree with that. So I think the incremental effect of that is essentially negligible. I also would like to echo the importance of the whale watch fleet being in the vicinity of the whales. I can attest, especially running sound watch, and we'd be on scene with whales when there were no commercial whale watch boats and when there were, and it actually makes a big difference. And it's helpful to be able to point out to recreational boaters who don't know what they're doing, to say, hey, you see all those boats in that line there? You should go do what they're doing. It's a huge tool. And just one last thing as far as what we can do. The gentleman from Lopez mentioned the only thing we can do is limit vessels. I disagree. I think we could also shut down Chinook fishing in Washington, D.C., U.S., Canada, tribes, everything for 5 years. One generation cycle. Let's just everybody shut it down, let all the fish come back and spawn. Right on. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Kelly, and then Donna Soren? Okay.
I'll wait for Donna, go ahead. Ladies first.
Donna first. Kelly or Donna?
Kelly wants the last word.
Hi everyone, thanks. Thank you all for being here and hosting this. This is a really important topic. I too wish we had the opportunity to talk about this in Seattle. As we all know, these orcas don't just matter to people on San Juan Island, they matter to everyone in the state. JPOD is down. We watched JPOD off of West Seattle yesterday. They go right to our hearts like nothing else. And I know that none of us in this room want to see the whales go extinct. And I think I have something in common with Ivan because I'm kind of mad at NOAA too, for a different reason. 10 years ago, or a little over 10 years ago, NOAA actually proposed a no-go zone on the west side of San Juan Island. How many of you remember that? There was little community support. It was not enacted. How different would it be today if the whales had had 10 years of uninterrupted access to the west side of San Juan Island? We will never know because it didn't happen. So in answer to the first question, yes. Oh, I should say, I'm the founder and director of the Whale Trail, which promotes shore-based whale watching, and I was also a member of the Governor's Task Force on Killer Whale Recovery. We are losing the battle to save the southern residents. They are disappearing before our eyes, and they will go. I started the Whale Trail when I read a note that they could go extinct. Actually, a Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife biologist said the whales will go extinct in less than 100 years if the population trend continues or worsens. It has worsened. 100 years is a minute in time. In one human generation, starting with the captures in the 70s till now, we have brought this magnificent species to the edge of disappearing forever from these waters that have been their ancestral homes for thousands of years, long before there were people here. Do we want to sit by and watch that happen? Well, shouldn't we do everything we can to give them their next minute? The answer to that is yes. And after months and months of concerted study on the task force, we found what everyone always finds. It's 3 issues: salmon, toxin accumulations, and noise. The noise makes it harder for the whales to find their food. And the whale watch industry, as well as recreational boats, are a problem. NOAA, what we want you to do is do what the task force recommended and what the governor supported. And we had the challenge of getting it through the legislature, and we couldn't. But you could do it right now, and we want you to do it right now. We've got a licensing system that will be in place in 2021. That's a long time for things to go wrong for the whales. We want an emergency moratorium on whale watching of the southern residents by all vessels, starting now, and in place until the whales start to recover. That means a 650 yards distance around the whales. It is equitable, it is enforceable, and Fish and Wildlife can maintain that distance. That's what we want.
Kelly, welcome. Kelly here? Okay. And then after you will be Liz. Lovely.
Thank you very much.
So first, before I say anything, I'm Kelly Bartok with the Pacific Whale Watch Association currently. That is my employment for the past 6 months, and we will be providing a written statement as well. There's quite a bit of documentation. I would also quickly reiterate a number of the PWWA captains and fleet people here that were professionals and very passionate, and I thought said everything I needed to say, so I checked off almost everything on my list. We didn't cover a couple of things though, and that is first, yes, thank you all for coming, because I think it's safe to say that everybody in this room really does care about these southern resident killer whales, and I thank you for that. The second one was maybe a moment of silence in all of this. We forgot maybe J17 and her granddaughter who was passed this last summer and carried on to J35 for 17 days. So I'm going to give a moment of silence for myself for that. And then I'm going to take us on a quick journey. I have 2 minutes and 4 seconds. The journey starts out at the Swiss Shore Bank, where their critical habitat of the southern residents is right now desperately critical. And there's food sources out there for them. And while they're working the Swiss Shore Banks, we have a shipping lane that goes right through the middle of it. And shipping traffic does impact whales. Let's get over it, stop arguing about it. Let's all agree on working on noise, and let's start with shipping. As they come in through the straits and leaving Swiss Shore Bank, which is critical to them, they come through the Strait of Juan and they pass through military exercises. All sorts of fun military things that I don't even want to get into right now, but they are killing whales throughout the world. They're chasing them up out of deep water. They're throwing them on beaches. So let's not forget to address that instead of closing a zone. Let's not close a zone. Let's not allow any zone that kills our whales. Is truly our protection of the world that that important that we would actually go ahead and kill our southern residents right there in their critical habitat? I think not. And then as they come into the Strait of Juan, passing all those military vessels, they enter into the ferry traffic of the Victoria and the ships that are coming through on a regular basis and will increase by 35%. And then when the whales aren't welcomed by our whale watch boats, they're certainly welcomed by the research boats that throw darts and shoot them. One actually died due to that, so let's not forget that's on NOAA too. Boundary Pass and the shipping traffic and the shipping lanes and the ferries and all the other things that are going on. And then back into the Strait of Georgia for the military exercises where they close the zone. So you know they're there, let's just not look. And all of this has nothing to do with what really matters to the whales. Food. It's food. It is salmon, it's salmon recovery, it's salmon habitat. Without food, empty shells, they go elsewhere. There's no reason for them to be here if there isn't food to eat. So let's focus on food. That said, I have 8 seconds. Pardon me. I also want to say that the reason I am now working for and am proud to work for the Pacific Whale Watch Association is they are some of the most dedicated, passionate people that are actively engaged in southern resident recovery, and they're working hard, and we're at the table, and I look forward to working with you at that capacity. And I think that it's important to recognize that everybody that said everything about the whales is important, but that the community of whale watchers is critical to their survival. They are the passionates as well.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'd like to invite Liz, and then Valerie too, and then Tom Glade, thank you. Liz.
Hi, I'm Senator Liz Lovett, and I basically came today to listen. I was invited here to just hear more about what NOAA was trying to accomplish, and really wanted to hear back from you guys as to what was important. I had a pretty good sense. I've been out on the streets, I've been talking to lots of people. I sponsored and passed the bill that had to do with incorporating safe whale watching distances into the boater safety education piece. And actually, to your earlier point, I actually tried to get a sticker that everybody would get that would go on their dash, on their boats, so that people would have a visual representation of what that looked like. But having just had the opportunity to be out on a Department of Fish and Wildlife boat, I can tell you my sense of what 300 yards looks like was completely off. I thought I was way closer than I was supposed to be. That I thought I was way farther away. It's really hard to tell. And so what I wanted to send back to you guys is the enforcement piece. The state only has so much capacity to pay for Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Sound Watch guys do a fantastic job of getting out there on the daily. They are in these open top boats, cruising around, making sure that people are being respectful of the whales, but we need your help in paying for enforcement vessels to make sure that people are dealing dealing with that. And I think my other big takeaway is cumulative impact. You know, maybe we need a moratorium on creating more whale watching businesses. That might be a restriction we could try. But I think that when we talk about, you know, everybody here is passionate about the whales. There's no doubt about it. And there's a lot of villainy going on around that. But what we have to understand is that there has to be some kind of economic mitigation strategy if the decision is ultimately that we're not going to allow whale watching vessels. There has to be some way to compensate people for losing their livelihood, because that's just as terrifying to them. Additionally, I think that harmonizing the regulations that we have between Washington State, the Canadian government, and the federal government is incredibly important because, again, the enforcement is confusing. If you travel just a little bit further north and now you're in Canadian waters, what does that do for your distances? And I think we ought to just make it all whales, not just our southern residents, because a lot of people from a distance can't tell what it is they're looking at. They certainly can't tell the difference between a transient and a resident. Very few people in this room can. So let's expand it to be all the whales, all together. Let's look at cumulative impacts. Let's look at additional resources for enforcement, and let's make sure that we're harmonizing all of our regulations. Thank you.
Valerie and Tom.
All right. So I just am going to talk a little bit about myself. I was given the opportunity to work at NOAA as a contractor for 4 years at the Emergency Response Division, working on oil spill risk assessment tools. I worked on one and executed 2 software releases for this tool called the Chemical Aquatic Fate and Effects Database, and I was the one that gathered most of the data from 1969 to 2015 on oil, like research, like toxicity data for all of that. And then after that, I went to graduate school at Western Washington University, got my master's degree, and my thesis research was the effects of organophosphate pesticides on Chinook salmon populations within 4 Washington state watersheds. So, I know the issues between all 3 of the orca causes for decline. Pollutants, noise, and the fish, the salmon. So yes, I know all 3 of the issues, and it takes all of us to work together to make a change. It doesn't matter if it's a whale watcher or the local government or the nonprofits. It's our job to work together to save our orcas. And this is why we're all here. Yes, we all just, all of us don't agree on everything, obviously, because we all have our different views. But honestly, I think it is just a collaborative effort to work together on just, setting regulations and this is why we're all here, to just see how we can make a change. And yes, I agree with no-go zones, and obviously, yes, we need to protect the food. I would have definitely like a no-go zone around Cherry Point, because that's where the foraging fish, Pacific herring, live. And that's where Chinook salmon eat and like to forage before they go out and rear and then go out to the ocean and grow and become adults and then spawn back. So yes, I would like a lot of no-go zones. Definitely, there's going to be a lot more vessel traffic because there will be more stuff that's going to happen with the refineries. I think all of these need to be taken into consideration, and that's why NOAA is here. And this is why I'm here too, because I just applied for a job for ecology doing oil spill risk assessment. So yes, I'm here to take notes. I am around here to talk to every NGO and hear their opinions. So that's why I traveled here from Seattle yesterday, today, and I'm leaving tomorrow. So please give me a call.
Thank you, Valerie.
Good evening. My name is Tom DeLay. I'm here tonight representing Evergreen Islands. Evergreen Islands has been in existence for over 42 years. Our founding fathers and mothers got their start stopping the nuclear power plant on Picket Island and the Guimas Island smelter. So we were participating in the whale protection zone common period And I read a complaint from the Canadian Pilots Association that the well protection zone would impact the shipping lane. And so that brought to mind that there would be a way of separating the vessel traffic away from the well protection zone by creating a pair of one-way shipping lanes, one northbound and one southbound. The northbound lane would transit Harrow Strait, and the southbound lane would transit Rosario Strait. Both proposed routes take advantage of the fact that both shipping lanes transit seaways that are currently designated as U.S. Coast Guard special areas. The proposed southway lane transits the Turn Point Special Operating Area, and the proposed northbound transit lane is the Eastern San Juan Island Archipelago BTS Special Area, aka the Rosario Strait Special Operating Area. The advantage of these one-way shipping lanes are multiple. The width of the unidirectional shipping lanes could be reduced significantly, allowing more room for the proposed whale protection zone. The high vessel traffic risk at Boundary Pass and at Rosario Strait would be significantly reduced. The significantly reduced traffic, about half, will in turn significantly lower vessel noise in the vicinity of the whale protection zone. The vessel traffic in both shipping lanes is already actively controlled by either the BTS, Puget Sound, Seattle traffic, or the Victoria MCTS, Victoria traffic, which is the BTS is the U.S. Coast Guard Vessel Traffic Service, and the MCTS is Canadian Communications and Traffic Service. So I suggested this earlier, and so I have heard nothing about this suggestion, but I encourage that NOAA consider this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And do we have any other comment cards? Okay. I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to join us here, and especially those who provided verbal comments. Also, a reminder that there are 2 additional ways to provide comments. We have comment form if you care to write your comments, submit it here in real time, or by way of our website. I think Grace is going to pull that up for you. And again, just a reminder that we are collecting public input, and the comment period remains open through December 23rd. So with that, I'd like to conclude the public scoping meeting. Thank you.